Sydney Fazard for Rebel News, coming to you from downtown Calgary, Alberta, a Canadian province which might be on the verge of separation, and with good reason.
A federal election is not going to change the inequities of Canadian federalism or change the structure of the Canadian Constitution. So we're proceeding regardless. On current polling, to the extent that Ontario, all of the so-called have-not provinces in Canada are going to elect a Carney government so that they can keep drawing money out of Alberta to subsidize inefficient governments in those jurisdictions. I think that all but guarantees, on the basis of the demands that Danielle Smith put forward to the government, that there will be a referendum this year and that the referendum will succeed. I think the election of a Carney government basically spells the end of Canada as we presently know it.
After generations of neglect and abuse by the federal government in Ottawa, many in Alberta have had enough and are strongly considering a move towards provincial independence. This feeling has escalated drastically in the past few months as the Liberal Party has not only provoked a trade war with the world's biggest superpower and our closest ally, the United States, but also allowed for the expat globalist Mark Carney to replace Trudeau as Prime Minister without an election, mandate from Canadians, or even a seat in the House of Commons. Now, recently, Rebel News conducted a poll through Ledger, showing that if given the option to separate from Canada and join the United States, 10% of the province would agree. And if the Liberals win the next election, this jumps to 15%. But remember, this is a poll on separating and joining the United States. Today, however, the topic is simply separating from Canada once and for all. Mere days ago, an election was called, but for many Albertans, the damage has already been done. For separatists, two outcomes have risen to the forefront. Either the federal party that wins will adhere to the provincial demands laid out by Premier Danielle Smith, and Alberta retains its confederation status, or a referendum for independence will be held in the near future, which could solidify plans for the province to separate from Canada once and for all.
Canada would consider an energy embargo on the United States. And I want to, as leverage, what do you think, what do you make of what she said?
Well, first of all, it's oil and gas is owned by the provinces, principally Alberta, and we won't stand for that. And you should never, ever threaten something you cannot do.
If they were to proceed down that path for some reason, what would be Alberta's response?
Well, they will have a national unity crisis on their hands at the same time as having a crisis with our U.S. trade partners.
We interviewed Alberta lawyer and separation advocate Jeffrey Rath during his press release today, March 26th, to see exactly what the independence movement is planning and how likely separation actually is.
Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion, should we join the United States? Should we be a standalone independent state? Those are all questions for another day. The initial mission is to have a referendum for independence, and then following that, all of the subsequent questions can be answered in terms of future relationships with the United States. There's nothing wrong with having a citizens' initiative to move something like this forward. But again, it's not just me. I'm also involved with the Alberta Prosperity Society and the Alberta Prosperity Project. We have over 66,000 members, supporters, and volunteers firmly committed to gather, if Danielle Smith will not call a referendum herself this year, firmly committed to gathering the signatures that we need under the Citizens Initiative Act to have a referendum this year on that basis. And, quite frankly, given that it looks like Mark Carney is likely to be elected as the next Prime Minister of Canada, I don't think we have any option now other than to vote for independence to protect ourselves from another 4 years of devastating misrule by a Liberal government in Ottawa that actually thinks that it can use shutting down Alberta oil to the United States as a negotiating tactic in a trade war that the Liberals themselves started for the sole purpose of winning an election.
I call him Governor Trudeau, but he's Prime Minister Trudeau when he was Prime Minister. And I said, do you think it's fair that we're paying $200 billion to keep Canada going? And what would happen, I asked him, what would happen if we didn't do that, if we didn't subsidize Canada? He said, we'd be a failed nation. And I said, then you should be a state.
There are several other retired members of Parliament that were here today. I've had expressions of interest from sitting members of the Legislature of Alberta that fully support what we're doing. Obviously, to the extent that Premier Smith has indicated that failing Canada meeting the conditions that she set out in her recent communication to Prime Minister Carney, there'll be a referendum this year. So obviously, from our perspective, we have the support of Premier Smith for a referendum this year that we're very grateful for. So there'd be no more federal income tax. There'd be no GST. There'd be no excise tax. There'd be no carbon tax. There'd be no more equalization payments where taxes, pension, and UI benefits included, we send $70 billion plus a year to Ottawa and get less than $35 billion a year back from the rest of Canada, or Confederation as it's called. So imagine the wealth and the prosperity of this province with all of that money remaining in the province, remaining in the provincial economy. Imagine Alberta with control of its own immigration, so that where we have cities that don't have enough water, don't have enough electricity, don't have enough housing, that we can say, hang on, no vacancy, time out, until we sort out all the people that are presently here and we accommodate everybody that's here, and have a sensible immigration policy as opposed to what we've been dealing with.
It seems like this upcoming federal election will yield one of two results. Either Pierre Poilievre will win, and possibly we'll see movement on the demands made by Premier Danielle Smith, or Mark Carney will actually get elected this time, and undoubtedly the separation movement is going to skyrocket. Time will tell. For Rebel News, I'm Sidney Fazard. If you want to see more stories like this that matter to Albertans and showcase the federal government's mismanagement of the province, go to handsoffalberta.ca.